So if I can introduce to you our second speaker in the panel, Andrew Kane. Andrew works as a research consultant with the Ulster Historical Foundation, and his voice is well known in his home town of Coleraine and along the north coast, where he's been actively involved for many years in family history research. Just in 2024, he published with the foundation the Townland Atlas of Ulster, by which all over 16,000 townlands in the province were included. Today he will talk to us about mapping the Ulster Plantation estates. Andrew.
Okay, well thank you very much, Paddy, and good afternoon everyone. Today I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience of creating the Townland Atlas of Ulster in relation to the really try to recreate the plantation estates and work forward from there. So I'm going to deal with how the estates were described before the plantation, what mapping was available at its outset, very much along the same lines as Annalee has already covered, the maps created during the plantation and in its immediate aftermath, noting the dramatic improvement in surveying techniques as the 17th century progressed, and then finally how gaps in the surviving mapping can be reconstructed. Okay, so prior to the plantation, surveying was done by inquisition, where local jurors confirmed the boundaries of a property, including the names of the smaller denominations making up the estates, and these are what we would call townlands. Here we have an extract from the County Antrim Inquisition of 1605, and up here we can see that it describes the Killeela estate of Neil O'Neil. So it describes the boundaries, and then it goes on to list 12 of the 20 townlands that fall within that area, followed by the remark, with others whose names, on account of the long devastation of the country, the jurors cannot learn. So this shows both the strength and weakness of the Inquisition method used alone, in that you know exactly what they're talking about because of the boundaries, but what's inside is very much up to people's knowledge, and they don't really seem to have gone into too much bother to find out. So, and the scant mapping done at the time is insufficient to identify the precise boundaries on the ground. So in 1548, Walter Cowley was appointed the first Surveyor General of Ireland. And although this was a very progressive sounding appointment, it did not result in a great flurry of official or accurate map making. His role consisted mainly of determining the financial value of estates, and he was specifically excluded from a role in surveying forfeited land, which remained under the direct control of the Lord Deputy. This map you've seen already this afternoon. It's the Francis Jobson map of around 1590. Showing what really prevailed before the plantation. Large estates are marked and there's boundaries shown and names and so on, but scale and detail are markedly absent. Jobson, in his correspondence, refers to various estates outside Ulster which he provided maps for, but none, to my knowledge, none of these survive. But the game was changed totally with the flight of the Earls and the subsequent forfeiture of 6 whole counties in Western Ulster, making a huge area available for redistribution by the Crown. The Surveyor General at this time was William Parsons, who held the post from 1602 right up to 1641, so the whole plantation period up to the 1641 rebellion. His reputation, unfortunately, with professional map makers was very poor indeed. Thomas Raven was scathing of him. And it was left to the military men like Sir Josias Bodley and Nicholas Pinner to perform the role of surveyor as we would understand it in the distribution of estates under the plantation. Royal Commissioners visited Ulster from Dublin in 1609, and their instructions were to make an accurate survey or measurement of the arable lands in each county, that the names and situations of each Ballybough, Tate, Quarter and Pole should be preserved and expressed on carefully prepared maps, as well as the name of every lake, river, brook, wood, fort, bog and any other landmark throughout the said 6 counties. The commissioners were also required to identify separate church lands and designate the precincts, baronies in each county to the several intended occupants, and marking off the arable land in proportions to suit planters. These proportions of 1, 1.5 or 2,000 acres are the plantation estates which survived in one form or another right up to the Land Purchase Acts of the 20th century. Now this mammoth task was commenced by the commissioners at Armagh Assizes on the 8th of August 1609, and they finished their work at Cavan Assizes on the 30th of September the same year. Less than 2 months to measure, survey and combine into equally valuable estates the entirety of 6 complete counties. Clearly a lot of preparatory work was done before they arrived, and you've already heard about the maps of Josiah's Bodley in that regard. But a large part of the work was simply appropriating the status quo. The unit, now known as the Townland and described in the instructions, Bodley's instructions there as the Ballyboe Tate Quarter or Pole, were already integral to Irish landholding. As such, units were ubiquitous. They were assumed to be roughly equal, approximately equivalent to half an English ploughland, and estimated to include 60 acres of arable land. This gross assumption of the basis of acreage is the basis of acreage as given in the plantation grants and even 40 years later in the civil survey. So you can see here how the adoptions of the Gaelic system did not end with taking the townland features. The lands of Gaelic lords are the estates that we see mapped on the Elizabethan era maps, like the Jobson map. But these were then distributed among his chief followers as Ballybeatas, a unit of more or less 16 townlands. So on the basis of an estimated 60 acres per townland, the Ballybeata therefore consisted of 960 or approximately 1,000 arable acres. As the small proportion granted under the plantation was to be 1,000 acres, the civil servants drawing up these estates had basically a ready-made template for their work, and the extent to which the new proportions matched the existing Ballybeatas, whose names they often adopted, is a fascinating subject for further research. This is the Bodley map for Lochensholen barony, which I have, in my course of my work for producing my atlas, I then had this as a Queen's copy, and I had put in the modern spelling of each townland name. So you can see that there were, we've already heard how many maps survived: Armagh, Tyrone, Donegal and Fermanagh. Armagh, Tyrone, Fermanagh and Cavan have all their maps, barony maps, survive. For Donegal, there are no maps other than sketches, and for Londonderry, we simply have Lochensholen, this barony, as it was originally part of County Tyrone. The fieldwork was recorded in books without measurement, and the maps completed elsewhere. So the basic assumption that each Ballyboe or townland was equal size is demonstrably wrong, but is a useful rule of thumb for a royal commission in a hurry. Some of the Bodley maps are great. This one is very good. You can see how it lines up with the modern townlands practically one-to-one. Very occasionally there are further combinations or splits, but practically one-to-one there. This map is practically useless for linking grants to modern place names. But as the unit used is much larger, it's often described in papers as a quarter, but it seems to be much larger than a quarter would be in any of the other counties, and is no longer in use. We do see some correlation to this for the in the books of survey and distribution, which we'll discuss later, where specific townlands are allocated to each quarter, but only for the barony of Macrostepina, and not, unfortunately, for Knocknany or the other counties. Armagh, which Annalee also showed you, is an absolute classic. It did my head in, because it's upside down and back to front. You can see when I started to write in the names of the townlands, I go, how can that be to the side of this one below? It just doesn't make any sense. Well seen. It's done out in an office from somebody who couldn't understand somebody else's handwriting. These maps, though, are essential in understanding the plantation grants, because it's the names on these maps that are used in the grants, which are happily collected together and preserved in George Hill's plantation in Ulster. As you can see here, this is one of the County Tyrone grants to Edward Kingswell, and it lists all the Ballyboes, and then it gives a total of 1,000 acres, and it refers to these Ballyboes containing 60 acres each, and so on, so forth. In his magisterial work, Plantation Acres, Professor Andrews refers to the poor quality of the Bodley maps, noting in particular that the barony maps don't even fit together. And this is highlighted in the case of Ballycolway. It's a Ballybeta, or quarter, in Knocknany barony, which we saw earlier, on its boundary with Tullyhaw barony in County Cavan. It's not included in the maps of either barony, and so was not included in the plantation grants. So, and subsequently Lady Maguire was able to successfully petition the Crown for the rents of this land on the basis of a pre-Flight of the Earls grant, which is really amazing whenever we think about how we view the plantation. But they just said, oh, it hasn't been granted to anybody else, it must still belong to the Maguires. So, and indeed the work done by the commissioners at Coleraine Assizes, which took over a week or 10 days at the end of August, was totally wasted, as that county was not even included in the conventional plantation scheme, and instead was divided into the 12 estates that Annalee has already talked about. Now, this was done in 1610. It was the City of London signed an agreement with the Privy Council to take on the Londonderry plantation. But although it was not until 1613 that a royal charter incorporated the Irish Society which administered that particular plantation and created the new county of Londonderry from the old County Coleraine and neighbouring chunks of Antrim, Tyrone and Donegal. The new county consisted of much larger estates than the other planted areas, and a detailed valuation of each townland was undertaken to ensure that each estate was of exactly equal value. And you can see here that the surveyors for the London companies have actually gone out at each townland and they have given a valuation. Now the valuation is at 4 pence in the pound, and so I'm giving every estate a nominal annual value of £138.15, although the number of townlands varies from 27 on the Clothworkers estate and the plains outside Coleraine to 65 townlands in the Skinners estate in the uplands of the Sperrins. So if that had been under the ordinary scheme, those would have just been considered equivalent townlands. The individual companies, guilds, then produced maps of their own estates, and several of them show the Ballybetas as well as the townlands, such as this one of the Ironmonger's estate of Manor of Lizard. The Londoners had engaged Thomas Raven to survey their lands, but when Thomas Phillips came in dispute with the London companies, he engaged Richard Hadser to produce alternative maps of each state in the 1620s as part of that dispute, and these are preserved in the volume Londonderry and the London Companies, 1609 to 1629, which was published by PRONI back in 1928. I can just, although these maps do not really show very clearly the outlines, you couldn't walk the boundaries of each of those townlands based on that map. Again, you can see there's one name, modern and old, they're easily identifiable, but the large green type are the Ballybetas. You can see how they are not even all in one homogeneous group, but they can have wee outliers as well. Okay, other estate owners also mapped their estates. This is the Hadser map, again showing names but no boundaries or whatever. That is the grocer's company outside Derry City. Okay. Other estate owners have mapped their estates with varying degrees of accuracy, and these remain an important source of detail for an admittedly small proportion of estates. The major upheavals of 1641 and the subsequent Cromwellian Wars led to a further flurry of official surveying. This is the civil survey conducted by commissioners appointed in each county to determine and record the possessions of the proprietors of land as of the 23rd of October 1641. So again, you can see here how they have assumed the 60 acres per townland, but they've got all the names and they've done some sort of apportionment between arable and pasture and so on. But it's hardly what you would call an accurate survey. The commissioners were to be revenue officials and or other able and knowing men of the country, and distinct local juries were empanelled in each barony to assist the commissioners in the way the inquisitions were done. They were to find out and inquire into every particular, but only where necessary to view and tread the metes and bounds of the premises. You'd say, I can't imagine they did very much. So, while the survey has acreages and values, these are no more than estimates or the current rental, and no maps were produced with this survey. But it is important. It only survives for the counties of Tyrone, Donegal and Londonderry, but where it does survive, at least it gives us a full list. You can say, here are all the townlands that were identified in that county. So if we don't know who owned one from other sources, that's a gap we have to fill. And unfortunately, it's only for 3 of the 6 planted counties. The quantity of surveying takes a massive leap forward here with the appointment of Sir William Petty to complete the Down survey. Petty had come to Ireland as a physician, but he soon came into dispute with the Surveyor General Benjamin Worsley over the conduct of the detailed survey of forfeited and church lands identified in the civil survey reports. Petty took over this work himself and produced maps and acreages that I think are remarkable in their quality and relative accuracy, not only for their own time, but comparable to anything before the establishment of the Ordnance Survey in the 1820s. Now, although not within the official plantation, the estates of the Earl of Antrim, which covered 6 whole baronies of northern County Antrim, clearly demonstrate the problem that denominations recorded in the Down Survey, and indeed all of the 17th century sources, are not always precisely aligned with the townlands recognised by the Ordnance Survey. And you can see here I have the green lines represent the boundaries in the Down Survey map, and the black lines is where they are the ones we know today. Basically, a lot of these, particularly upland areas, are shown by quarter, maybe 3 townlands, or even some of them are just, we can see townlands that have been clearly divided into upper and lower subsequently. But generally speaking, it gives us an idea of what's covered in the documents. So if you're looking for what happened in take a townland there, Turnavenog in Lochgiel, you know that it's part of Ballynock quarter, simply from this map, and you can look up Ballynock as your reference for that townland. Okay, the range of descriptive words for places now identified as townlands, it's not particularly clear on that, shows just that these sub-denominations existed at the time, but were simply not recorded unless they were required. So we can't assume that just because a place is not named on these maps, that it wasn't called by that name at that time, and you can often find reference to it in leases and rentals and so on. And although the surveyors only map the potentially forfeit and church lands, they are accurate enough to allow us to determine the limits of estates not subject to the Cromwellian depredations, and can determine which subsequent subdivisions fall within certain estates and which do not. And the description of the boundaries also pinpoint the extent of individual land holdings. These, the Down Survey maps are available in PRONI under D of 597. So the final piece of the jigsaw is provided by the books. This is about the different names. You can see here that quarter, 20 acres, half town, so on, townland and town and lands are all used for things that we would identify as one townland today, and they vary enormously in size from those mid-century sources. So hopefully you've been upstairs and were able to see a copy of the books of survey and distribution upstairs. There's a County Down volume open, and they really are brilliant. They were compiled after the restoration of Charles II in 1660, and an Annesley copy of this criminally underused source is held in PRONI, and you can see one of the volumes. They are also can be consulted readily under microfilm MIC 532. But it draws together the ownership information from the civil survey, the map references and accurate acreages from the Down survey, and best of all, it actually covers 8.5 of the 9 counties of Ulster. Apologies to anyone from Fermanagh, because you contain the half county that is missing. So, but it also states who owned each land unit before, not under the short-term Cromwellian allocation to soldiers and adventurers, but rather the restoration settlement following the deliberations of the Court of Claims. So, quickly finish off here. No one document can give us all the information we need to map the plantation estates. But the sheer variety of 17th century sources, and I used all of these sources to help map my estates in my atlas. The sheer variety allows us to complete the picture by the interplay between them. This is the finished product. This is part of the plantation estates map for the barony of Coleraine, and it shows the complex network of how estates are not all necessarily in one place. They're interspersed with other estates and native lands and church lands and so on. And whenever you take into account the freeholds within each London manor, the situation becomes even more interesting and much, much more complicated than you would assume. Again, in my atlas, I have sought to, for each of 400 estates across Ulster, I have referenced them to all those sources, so you can look up directly which folio or page or whatever of what the name is, because sometimes it's very difficult to use sources like the muster rolls because you don't know what it's called, that estate's called in the muster roll thing. So I think that's me. I'm sorry I had to sort of look through this very quickly because Annalie kept talking about all the things I was going to talk about. I should have gone first.
Thank you so much, Andrew.